The room glittered with curated opulence. Above the ballroom, chandeliers swayed gently in the breath of the air conditioning, each drop of crystal catching the light in a way that made the ceiling feel almost alive. Men in tailored tuxedos drifted from one conversation to another like they were navigating tides of wealth. Women in gowns of silk and sequins leaned toward each other with champagne glasses tilted at perfect angles, their laughter timed as precisely as the clink of crystal. At the head table, Adrian Whitlock leaned back in his chair, one leg crossed over the other, the faintest trace of amusement playing on his mouth. People said he had that kind of facetious sort that looked perpetually entertained by a joke no one else had heard yet. Tonight was no different. "I'll marry anyone who can play Chopin's Balladno one perfectly," he said, his voice smooth and casual, as if it were the most ordinary comment in the world. It wasn't. He spoke as though he were tossing something shiny into the air, knowing everyone would stop to watch it fall. A beat of startled silence hung in the air. Then, as if on cue, a few guests burst into indulgent laughter. Someone raised a glass and declared, "To romance." A woman whose perfume reached the table before she did laid a manicured hand on Adrian's sleeve. "Are you serious?" she asked, her eyes glittering with curiosity and calculation. Adrian's smile didn't change. "I never really did," but something behind it hinted at both sincerity and mischief. "Wouldn't the press love that?" he murmured. And of course, the press was here. The city's social photographers circled the crowd like discreet predators, snapping flashes of the latest dresses and powerful handshakes. Somewhere, someone had already typed the words "mysterious tech billionaire offers his heart to Chopin" into a draft headline. Adrian swirled the wine in his glass, the movement lazy and unhurried. He wasn't expecting anyone to take him seriously. The comment had been nothing more than a flicker of provocation in an evening otherwise drowning in predictable pleasantries. Until he saw her. Across the room, by the bar, a young woman had stopped mid-step. She was carrying a silver tray with a row of champagne flutes, the glasses steady despite the fact that she seemed to have frozen in place. Her dark hair, pinned loosely at the nape of her neck, had allowed one strand to fall forward over her cheek. She tucked it back without looking away from something. Not someone, something. Her gaze was locked on the grand piano in the far corner of the ballroom. It sat alone on a raised platform near the small stage, a Steinway with a finish so black it reflected the crystal light above like a mirror. All night it had been nothing more than an expensive decoration, an elegant nod to the idea of culture in a room that preferred conversation about stock options and weekend retreats in Provence. But Leila Arden didn't see a prop. She saw a promise, and she moved before she even realized she was moving. She placed the tray on the edge of the bar with a soundless precision born of habit. Without glancing round for permission, she crossed the expanse of polished floor, her plain black uniform blending into the shadows between sequin gowns and navy suits. No one noticed her until she stepped up onto the platform, slid onto the bench, and placed her fingers lightly on the keys. By the time Adrian realized what was happening, the first notes had already unfurled into the room. Chopin's Balladno. One was not music for the faint of heart. It was a storm disguised as a Storia piece that demanded not only technical mastery, but something harder to measure, truth. It could breathe tenderness into the air, then hurl it into chaos within the space of a heartbeat. It seduced and it demanded, it whispered and it roared, and Leila played it as if her life depended on it. Her touch was neither hesitant nor showy. There were no unnecessary flourishes, no theatrical toss of the head. She played like someone who had once known this piece so intimately it had been part of her blood, and who now was speaking it aloud again after years of silence. The air in the ballroom shifted. Conversations faltered. Laughter thinned and then stopped altogether. The clinking of glasses ceased. All iced hosts that had noticed her stayed fixed on the woman at the piano, though she didn't seem to see any of them. Every phrase she coaxed from the keys carried both precision and restraint, each note shaped not just by skill, but by something deeper. Adrian found himself leaning forward without meaning to. The easy charm he wore like a tailored suit slipped away, replaced by an expression that wasn't characteristically. The last chord rang out into the silence, hanging there as if the room itself were holding its breath. Then Leela rose, gave the faintest of nods toward the stunned audience, and stepped down from the platform. She didn't smile. She didn't bow. She didn't even glance at Adrian. Without breaking stride, she walked back to the bar, reclaimed her tray, and disappeared into the service hallway. Her heels made no sound on the carpet, but Adrian felt the echo of her presence like the resonance of a struck string. The ballroom exhaled in uneven bursts, as if no one had realized they'd been holding their breath until that moment. A few people murmured to each other, but the conversation felt brittle, mismatched to the thing that had just happened. Adrian didn't move. Something in him saw a thing he hadn't realized had gone missing, had shifted, broken open. She hadn't spoken a single word, but he had heard her as clearly as if she'd whispered in his ear. Later that night, after the gala had resumed, and the safe hum of background music returned, no one mentioned the impromptu performance aloud. Perhaps they didn't know what to say. Perhaps they didn't want to break the fragile magic of it by naming it. But Adrian didn't sleep. Not because a woman had impressed him. There were many women in his world who impressed him, but because her music had pulled him into a place he'd forgotten how to find. A place where nothing could be bought, negotiated, or engineered, and because she had vanished before he could even ask her name. Leela Arden, meanwhile, hadn't so much as glanced over her shoulder. She had left the gala without ceremony, walking through the service corridor with her tray stacked neatly and her heart pounding so loudly she thought it might rattle the glasses. By the time the guests spilled out into the cold Manhattan air, she was already home, shoes kicked off, standing barefoot in her small, quiet apartment. The faint rumble of the city outside slipped in through the window, filling the silence she'd left in that room. Her apartment was lined with mismatched shelves sagging under the weight of secondhand books. Old photographs curled slightly in their frames. A chipped ceramic mug sat on the windowsill, stuffed with piano-shaped bookmarks. From the battered armchair in the corner, a gray cat named Misa lifted his head, blinked at her, and promptly resumed napping. Leela dropped her bag, fed him without a word, then pulled an oversized sweater over her uniform. She didn't bother turning on the lights. The piece she'd just played still shimmered in her mind, not as a performance, but as a memory she hadn't meant to disturb. She hadn't touched a piano in 3 years. Not since the accident. Not since the hospital waiting room. Not since the guilt had settled into her chest like an immovable weight. The piano had once been everything: her voice, her escape, her rebellion, her solace, until it became the thing that stole her sister. A winter night, a girl named Emma Arden, 14 years old, eager and bright, determined to see her big sister's biggest performance yet. Leela had told her no. Emma had found a way to come anyway. A drunk driver, 4 blocks from the theater. Emma never made it, and Leela had never played again. Tonight hadn't been planned. She hadn't gone to the gala intending to touch that Steinway, but something in Adrian Whitlock's careless arrogance had cracked the dam. Something in the room's shallow laughter at the mention of music, as if it were a party trick, had made her hands ache to answer. She hadn't played to impress anyone. She had played to remind herself of only for 3.5 minutes that music was still hers. That loss hadn't taken every part of her, and when it was over, she'd run. The next morning dawned pale and gray, the kind of light that didn't bother to fight its way through the clouds. The streets of Brooklyn were still wet from a night of intermittent rain, and the air carried that cool metallic scent of the city before it fully woke. Inside the Velvet Bean Cafe, where Leela had been working for almost 2 years, Leonard Cole was already polishing glasses behind the counter. He always arrived before or anyone else, moving with the slow assurance of a man who had long since made peace with his own rhythms. At 65, with silver hair that curled slightly at the edges, and eyes that always seemed to hold a private juke, Leonard looked like someone who had once been part of something larger than a cafe, but had chosen this smaller stage instead. "Morning," he said without looking up as Leela pushed through the door. She hung her coat on the hook behind the counter, the air inside already thick with the scent of espresso and warm bread. "Morning," she replied. Leonard wiped the rim of a glass, held it to the light, and then said in his gravelly baritone, "Coffee's hot." Milk deliveries late again. And that was it. No mention of the gala, no curious questions, no sly grins about her sudden piano performance in a ballroom full of billionaires. That was Leonard. He never pushed. He simply made room for whatever a person was or wasn't ready to say. The cafe was small, all wooden floors and mismatched chairs, with a front window lined in potted succulents planted in chipped teacups. In the far corner stood an old black upright piano, dusty, its keys yellowing slightly at the edges and in desperate need of tuning. Leela avoided it as if it might bite her. Leonard, for his part, had never tried to coax her toward it. She was halfway through pulling shots for the first round of regulars when the bell above the door gave its soft jingle. It was the kind of sound she usually didn't notice, just part of the cafe's heartbeat. But this time, the air in her chest tightened before she even turned around. Adrian Whitlock stepped inside. Gone was the tuxedo from the night before. Instead, he wore a navy wool coat over a charcoal sweater, a black scarf loosely wrapped at his neck. He looked almost polished for the cafe's scuffed wooden floorboards and worn brick walls. But there was no entourage trailing him, no hint of the media that seemed to follow him everywhere else. His eyes found hers almost immediately. He smiled, not his practiced, camera-ready smile, but something smaller, cautious, the way someone might smile at a stray animal, afraid to startle it. Leela didn't smile back. Leonard, leaning in the doorway to the small kitchen, noticed. "Friend of yours?" he murmured. "Customer," she replied without blinking. Adrian approached the counter slowly, as though measuring the distance. "Cappuccino, please," he said. No mention of the gala, no mention of Chopin, just the quiet civility of someone ordering coffee on a weekday morning. Leela made the drink in silence, sliding it across the counter without looking directly at him. "Thank you," he said, his voice softer now. He didn't leave. Instead, he took a seat at the small table closest to the piano. 15 minutes passed. He sat quietly, sipping his cappuccino, his gaze drifting now and then to the rain-speckled window. 20 minutes. 30. Leela caught herself glancing in his direction twice. Then again, Leonard, ever perceptive, passed her with a tray of pastries and muttered under his breath, "Some people don't come to be heard. They come to listen." She didn't answer, but her hands shook slightly when she refilled the sugar jar. The next day, Adrian returned, and the day after that, always during the quiet hour between the morning rush and the lunch crowd, always ordering the same drink, cappuccino, double shot, always sitting at the table nearest the piano. He never brought a laptop, never took phone calls, never scrolled through a glowing screen like everyone else in the city seemed to. He simply watched the street outside, his presence steady and unintrusive. On his fourth visit, something shifted. He came in with a small spiral-bound notebook instead of the sleek devices most men in his position carried. Its cover was bent at the corners, the black cardboard frayed from being handled. After his first sip, he opened it and began to write, not the quick, efficient jotting of someone making lists or managing schedules. This was slower, more deliberate. His pen moved like it was coaxing something out of him rather than recording something he already knew. Leonard, wiping down the counter near Adrian's table, nodded toward the notebook. Memoir or confession? Adrian's mouth quirked slightly. A little of both. Leela overheard and almost smiled. Almost. Later that afternoon, when she was wiping down tables, she happened to pass close enough to see what was written on the open page. A single line in precise, deliberate handwriting. Some people don't play to perform. They play to survive. Her breath caught. That night, after the cafe closed, Leela stayed behind to finish the inventory. Leonard lingered too, under the pretense of reviewing receipts. She knew better had a habit of staying when he sensed something stirring in her. "You know," he said finally. He's not the first broken soul to find this place. I'm not broken, she said without turning round. I didn't say you were, Leonard replied gently. I said this place collects the quiet ones. The next day the rain returned, heavier this time. Adrian came in soaked, his coat dripping onto the floor, his hair flattened. Leela handed him a folded towel before he could ask. You'll ruin the chairs, she said. He accepted it with a look of faint surprise, dabbing at his face and hair with clumsy gratitude. Instead of taking his usual spot near the piano, he sat at the bar directly across from her. Out of seats, she asked. Thought I'd try a different view, he replied. And what do you see? He studied her for a moment before answering. Someone who plays like she's remembering how to breathe. Her hand stilled on the espresso machine. You don't know me. No, he said quietly, but I'd like to. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was dense, almost tangible, like a chord that hadn't resolved yet. He stood. I'll be back tomorrow. You always are, she replied without looking up. That night, after locking up, Leela walked over to the piano. Her fingers hovered above the keys, but she didn't play. Not yet. She simply rested her palm on the smooth surface, feeling the coolness of the wood. She didn't know Adrian Whitlock, not real but she knew the way he listened. And she wondered if maybe, just maybe, someone could hear her without trying to fix her. The next morning, Adrian ordered his usual, but Leela surprised herself by asking, Do you write music? No, he said, blinking. I listen to it, and sometimes I write about how it makes me feel. And the other night, she asked, when I played, he met her gaze. It felt like I wasn't alone anymore. She didn't respond, but when she handed him his cup, her fingers brushed his just slightly, not enough to be noticed by anyone else, but enough to mean something. Over the next week, the pattern became as natural as breathing. He arrived at 10:42 every morning. She began to notice she was listening for the bell above the door. He never pushed her to play, never mentioned the gala again, never even hinted at her past. But something about his presence made her feel less like she was under observation and more like she was being seen. The connection was building in the spaces between words. The day the cassette player appeared, the cafe was wrapped in a kind of afternoon stillness that felt rare even for the Velvet Bean's quieter hours. A soft drizzle was drifting down the window glass, distorting the shapes of the passing world. Inside, the smell of cinnamon and fresh coffee clung to the air, wrapping the space in gentle warmth. Leela had just finished topping up the sugar jars when Leonard ducked beneath the counter and set something down with the kind of reverence usually reserved for heirlooms or holy relics. It was small, rectangular, and faintly scuffed at the corners, a battered portable cassette player with a cracked plastic window over its spools. Leela raised an eyebrow. What is that supposed to be? Leonard's mouth curved into a smirk. That, he said, patting the device as if it were a loyal pet, is me, in 1987, at the Blue Note, playing jazz violin badly and thinking I was the second coming of Miles Davis. She laughed before she could stop herself, the sound slipping out surprised and unguarded. She didn't laugh much these days. Not really. Leonard slid a cassette into the player and pressed the warm play button. The music that crackled out was uneven, the violin occasionally wavering, sometimes chasing the piano's rhythm, sometimes darting ahead. There were imperfections in nearly every phrase, and yet there was life in it, something earnest and raw that made the flaws feel like part of the point. Leela leaned on the counter, listening. Do you miss it? She asked softly. Leonard didn't answer right away. His eyes stayed fixed on the spinning reels inside the player. I don't miss performing, he said finally, but I do miss what it felt like when I didn't have to pretend I was okay. She let her gaze drift toward the old piano in the corner. I used to feel that way at the piano, like I could be anything, like it didn't matter what people thought. Leonard's voice was gentle when he said, It still doesn't. She shook her head slightly. It's not about people. It's about memory. The last time I played for someone I loved, she never made it to the performance. Leonard reached over the counter and placed his hand lightly on hers. Maybe it's time you played for someone who doesn't ask you to perform, just someone who listens. That night, the rain came down harder, a steady percussion against the cafe's windows. Leela stayed after closing, the key to the front door tucked in her apron pocket. The streets outside shimmered under the lamplight, puddles catching the orange glow. She turned off the main lights, leaving only the faint glow from the street outside to spill across the room. This time she didn't hesitate. She walked to the piano, lifted the fallboard, and sat down. Her fingers rested lightly against the keys, unsure at first, then pressing down. The melody that came wasn't anything she recognized. Not Chopin, not Bach, not even something she'd have written in the past. It was small, fragile, unpolished, notes rising and falling in uneven breaths, like a conversation she hadn't rehearsed. It was clumsy in its beauty, and it was hers alone. Outside, footsteps slowed on the wet pavement. Adrian hadn't meant to be there. He'd been walking without direction, letting the rain blur the city lights until his coat was soaked through. But somehow, his steps had led him to the velvet bean. He was about to turn away when the sound reached him, soft at first, muffled by the glass, but unmistakable. He stepped closer until he was near enough for his breath to fog the window. His hands stayed buried in his coat pockets, the rain pooling at his feet. He didn't knock. He didn't move. He just listened. Inside, Leela played with her eyes closed, the lines of her face relaxed, her shoulders loose. She didn't know anyone was there. She wasn't playing for an audience, or for memory, or for forgiveness. She was playing for herself, and herself alone. When the final note faded, she let her hands fall into her lap. The silence that followed felt as full as the music had. The next morning, when she came in for her shift, she found something tucked under the sugar jar at the counter, a single folded piece of paper. She opened it to find 4 bars of melody, drawn in pencil. Her melody, the one she'd played the night before. She stared at it for a long time before her mouth curved into something small but real. Not the professional, the light smile she gave customers. Something unpracticed. When Adrian arrived later that morning, she handed him his cappuccino without a word. He lifted his cup in a silent toast. She tapped the counter lightly before turning away. Neither spoke about the paper. They didn't have to. That afternoon, she heard him humming under his breath. Not loudly, just enough that she could catch the thread of its same melody. Later still, Leonard passed her as she sat at the piano during her break, her fingers resting on the keys without pressing them. He didn't interrupt, only said quietly, "You don't always need words. Sometimes the song is enough." When she looked up, Adrian was watching her from his table, that same unflinching softness in his expression. She pressed one note, let it linger in the air, and saw him smiling out with recognition, but with understanding. The first time Leela spoke about Emmer, she didn't mean to. It wasn't planned. There was no careful lead-in, no dramatic pause to brace herself. It happened the way most truths do, slipping between moments when the heart forgets it is supposed to keep its doors locked. It was a rare quiet afternoon at the Velvet Bean. The light outside had shifted into that soft, late-day gold that made the sidewalk look warmer than it was. The weather had finally broken, trading days of rain for a gentle, steady sun. Adrian had come in carrying a small white paper bag that smelled faintly of butter and sugar. Without a word, he set it on the table by the window and gestured for her to join him. She hesitated, glancing toward Leonard. He waved her off with a mock scowl. "Go. It's not like the coffee's going to walk out the door." So she sat. Adrian pulled the flaky croissants from the bag and slid one toward her. "From a bakery across the river," he explained. "Worth the detour." She took a bite, the pastry warm enough that the chocolate inside melted against her tongue. She nodded once in approval. "She used to love these," she murmured without thinking. "Who?" Adrian asked. "My sister." The words were out before she could pull them back. His head tilted slightly. "You have a sister?" "Had," she corrected, her gaze dropping to the table. The green of the wood blurred, as if she were looking through it to somewhere far away. Adrian didn't speak. He didn't shift in his chair or lean forward the way people often did when they thought they were being comforting. He simply waited, the weight of his attention holding the space open. Emmer, Leela said after a long moment. 14. Too smart for her own good, always trying to keep up with me. A faint smile touched her lips, but it didn't last. I had a performance, she continued, her voice flat now, not trembling but emptied of color. A big one, national spotlight. She begged to come. I told her no. She snuck out and came anyway. Took a cab with one of my teachers. Adrian's fingers curled against the edge of the table. They were hit by a drunk driver, Leela said. 4 blocks from the theater. Her tone was steady, but her eyes were fixed somewhere far beyond the cafe walls. She died before I even walked on stage, and I still played because they told me not to stop. Said I owed the audience. Said the show must go on. She finally looked at him. After that night, I didn't touch a piano for 3 years. Not until the gala. What made you play then? He asked quietly. I don't know. She shook her head. Maybe it was you. Maybe it was your arrogance. Maybe it was me trying to find out if I could still feel anything besides guilt. And did you? Her eyes held his for a long, still moment. You heard it, she said. Adrian didn't try to make her laugh. He didn't reach for a line that might smooth over the rough edge of her confession. He simply nodded. I did, and I haven't stopped hearing it since. The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was necessary, like both of them needed to sit in the space that had just opened between them. The next morning, Will arrived early to find Leonard crouched beside the old upright piano, a small toolbox open on the floor next to him. He was turning a tuning key slowly, listening to the faint shift in pitch. You haven't touched that thing in a year, she said, leaning in the doorway. Thought maybe it deserved a second chance. He replied without looking up. You think a piano can forget? Leonard's mouth curved faintly. No, but I think it can forgive. She crossed the room slowly, her arms folded. For a moment, she just stood there, watching him. Then she sat down beside him on the bench. He handed her a cloth and nodded toward the keys. Dust doesn't clean itself. They worked together without talking. The soft scrape of cloth against ivory, and the faint hum of Leonard testing notes filling the space. When they were done, the piano looked not new, but awake. That afternoon, Adrian came in with a manila envelope tucked under his arm. He ordered his coffee as usual, then set the envelope on the table like it was something fragile. What's that? Leela asked during a lull. A contract, he said. Her brows rose. For what? A small showcase. Charity event. 2 weeks from now. I'm sponsoring it. Her body stiffened. No, hear me out, he said, holding up a hand. No pressure, no cameras, just music. Your terms, your piece. No audience you don't approve. Just you, a piano, and a room full of people who need something real. She stared at him. And if I say no, then I'll keep coming here every day, order coffee, and pretend I didn't dream of hearing you play again. She huffed out a dry laugh. You're ridiculous. I've been called worse. She picked up the envelope, but didn't open it, wing in her hands. I'll think about it. That's all I'm asking, he said. That night, after closing, she sat at the piano again. She didn't play Chopin. She didn't play anything she'd practiced. Her fingers moved slowly, feeling their way across the keys like she was learning how to bend old bones. Leonard watched from the counter, polishing a glass that didn't need polishing. When she stopped, he said, You don't owe the past anything. I'm not playing for the past, she replied without turning round. I think I'm playing for the first time. Adrian wasn't there that night, but somehow she knew he'd hear it anyway. 2 days later, the morning air carried a different kind of heaviness zone that had nothing to do with weather. Leela knew something was off before she even stepped through the door of the Velvet Bean. Leonard was already behind the counter, his phone in hand, his thumb hovering above the screen as though it was something dangerous. She stopped short. You look like you saw a ghost. He didn't smile. "You might want to see this." He held out the phone. On the screen was a shaky, slightly blurry video clearly taken from behind a column at the gallery. But the moment it began to play, she knew it was her. Her back straight, her hair in the same rushed bun she always wore when she was working. Her hands poised on the keys of that black Steinway. The audio wasn't perfect, but it didn't need to be. Even through the grainy recording, Chopin's Baladno, one rang out crisp, electric, alive. The caption at the bottom read, "Waitress stuns billionaire crowd with surprise Chopin masterpiece." Leila stared at the screen. The view count ticked upward in real-time thousands every few seconds. She scrolled down to the comments without meaning to. "Genius in disguise. Who is she? How do we not know her name?" And then, the one that made her chest clench, Caleb Monroe Adrian's name, tagged again and again in bold letters, along with endless speculation about their connection. She set the phone down slowly. Her hands were shaking. "Did you show this to him?" she asked. Leonard shook his head. "I just found it. I need air," she said, already untying her apron. She didn't wait for his reply. She pushed through the door and kept walking, the city swallowing her whole. The video followed her like a shadow, her phone lighting up with notifications she hadn't seen in years. Journalists, talent scouts, all acquaintances she hadn't spoken to since before Emma's accident. All of them asking the same questions. "Who are you? Where have you been? Why aren't you playing?" By the time she made it back to the cafe, Adrian was already there, sitting at his usual table. The manila envelope was still in front of him, unopened. She didn't speak, but the moment he saw her face, he stood. "I didn't post it," he said immediately. "I know," she replied, "but it doesn't matter. It's out. They know. And now it's all going to happen again." Her voice cracked not from fear, but from exhaustion. The pressure, the questions, the attention. "I can't do it. Not again. Not like last time." Adrian stepped closer, his voice steady. "Then don't. Don't do it for them. Do it for you. For Emma." Her eyes snapped to his. "You think it's that simple?" "I think nothing about you is simple," he said. "But I also think people don't stop hurting just because they hide." She turned away, but he kept going. "I know what it's like to be looked at for what people want you to be. I also know how rare it is to be seen for who you are." She didn't answer. "Leila," he said quietly, "if you never play for anyone again, I'll still be here every morning, ordering the same cappuccino, sitting in the same seat. But if you want to feel the thing against thing you felt at the gala, then do it. Not for them, not for me, just for you." Her shoulders rose and fell slowly, like she was trying to steady her breathing. That night, after closing, she didn't go home. She sat at the piano, her phone balanced on the stand. Without a word, she pressed record. She didn't play Chopin. She didn't play anything rehearsed. She played a melody without a name, soft, aching, filled with breath. It stretched on for 5 minutes. The kind of music that felt like an exhale after years of holding it in. When it ended, she saved the video but didn't post it. She sent it to one person, Adrian. No caption, no explanation, just the sound. In his apartment, Adrian lay in bed in the dark, the only light coming from his phone screen. He listened to it once, then twice, a third time. On the fourth, he closed his eyes. The next morning, when Leila arrived at the cafe, there was another slip of paper tucked under the sugar jar. This time, it wasn't sheet music. It was typed lyrics just for lines. "When the world stops listening, I'll hear you still. When the room is empty, I'll be there. When the lights are off and no one claps, I'll stand. Not for the song, but for the girl who plays it." She folded the paper and slid it into her apron pocket. She didn't mention it when Adrian walked in, but when their eyes met, something in hers had shifted. Not hesitation, not defense, but something like trust. Quiet, fragile, growing. The days after Adrian's note passed with a kind of suspended quiet. The viral video continued to race through the internet, gathering likes and comments at a speed Leila tried to ignore. She kept her phone on silent, left unread messages piling up like unopened mail. and focused on the familiar rhythms of the velvet bean. Adrian never brought it up again. He simply came in every morning at 10:42, ordered his cappuccino, and sat in his usual spot, sometimes writing in his notebook, sometimes just watching the street outside. A week later, after a shift filled with nothing but the steady hum of conversation and the hiss of the espresso machine, he placed the manila envelope on the counter once more. She looked at it. Still trying? I don't try, he said with that small, almost smile. I ask. She hesitated, her hands tightening on the rag she'd been using to wipe the counter. Who's on the list? He slid a single page from the envelope and handed it to her. No celebrities, no critics, no names she recognized from the glassy performance world she'd left behind. Instead, there were music students, a handful of local artists, a couple of parents, and the owner of a small community theater. No one who expects you to be perfect, he said. Just people who will listen. She scanned the list twice, then set it down. Okay. Adrian didn't grin or try to thank her. He just nodded like it was the most natural answer in the world. The night before the showcase, Leela stayed late at the cafe. She sat at the piano without playing, her hands resting on her lap as she stared at the keys. Her mind kept circling the same thought. It wasn't the people that scared Herod, was the silence before the first note. That silence felt like judgment, the weight of expectation pressing down before she even touched the keys. Leonard, wiping down the counter, caught her expression. Cold feet, she exhaled. It's not the crowd. It's that moment before you start. That pause. Silence isn't judgment, he said, leaning on the counter. It's an invitation. You just forgot you get to choose who walks in. She glanced at him. And if I freeze, then you freeze. And we unfreeze together, he said. That's what people who care do. The morning of the event, the city was wrapped in a crisp chill. Leela met Adrian at the Venuia small hall tucked between brownstones, the kind of place you could walk past without noticing. Inside, the air was warm, the walls lined with soft amber light. A single grand piano sat at the center of the stage, its lid open as if waiting. She wore black, not for mourning, but for focus. Her hair was pulled back neatly. Her hands were cold but steady. Adrian stood beside her backstage. Here, he said, handing her a folded piece of paper. Only if you need it. She didn't open it. When her name was called, she stepped onto the stage without introduction. The small crowd hushed instantly. She took her seat, the bench familiar in its slight creak beneath her weight. The silence came, but this time, it didn't feel like judgment. It felt like a deep inhaling, an entire room breathing with her. She played. The piece wasn't Chopin. It wasn't anything from her old repertoire. It was her blend of memory and the person she'd become, stitched together into something raw and controlled, tender and certain. Every note was a truth, every pause, a scar softened by time. She wasn't performing. She wasn't escaping. She was letting go. When the final note faded, no one clapped right away. They sat still, as if not wanting to break the moment. Then a child stood, followed by another. And then the whole room rose in applause. It wasn't the thunder of an audience expecting a show, it was gratitude, quiet and sincere. She looked at the paper she'd placed on the stand. Only now did she unfold it. Adrian's handwriting filled the page in a single line. You didn't play to be brave. You played because you already were. Her smile came slowly, but it stayed. She stepped off the stage to find him waiting in the wings. You didn't have to write that, she said. I wasn't sure I could say it without messing it up, he replied. Well, she said, slipping the paper into her bag, I'm keeping it. I was hoping you would. Later, after the chairs were folded and the guests had gone, Leela sat at the piano again. Adrian joined her, looking uncertain. I don't play, he said. That's fine, she replied. Press one note. He did a low C that filled the empty room with warmth. She added Anie. Then they took turns. No pattern, no pressure, just presence. It was clumsy and beautiful and exactly enough. After the showcase, Life at the Velvet Bean didn't so much change as settled differently. The air in the cafe felt a little warmer, as if the applause from that small hall had lingered and made a home in the wooden beams and scuffed floorboards. For Leela, the piano no longer sat in the corner like a ghost. It wasn't something she avoided, or even tiptoed around. It had become part of the room again, a live, waiting, welcome. Every morning before opening, she sat for a few minutes at the keys. Sometimes she ran simple scales, letting her fingers remember their muscle memory. Sometimes she played small and finished ideas, melodies she didn't name, just let happen. Adrian kept coming at 10:42 on the dot, his cappuccino order never changing. He still brought his notebook, though he wrote less in it now. Instead, he often just watched her play during those early minutes, his gaze soft, intent, as though he were listening for something only he could hear. One morning, after the cafe had been open for an hour, Leela walked to his table with a folded sheet of paper. She set it down in front of him without explanation. He opened it. 4 bars of melody, hand-drawn in pencil. "What's this?" he asked. "I think it's the beginning of something," she said. "I played it last night and thought it sounded like you." "Like me?" She nodded, a little unsure, but steady. Adrian didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached into his notebook, tore out a page, and handed it to her. She read it twice. The handwriting wasn't as neat as the melody. She'd given him small imperfections in the letters, but it was real. Lyrics, rough, unpolished, but honest. She folded the paper, slipped it into her apron pocket, and said nothing. But she gave him a look that was almost a promise. That evening, Leonard announced he was heading out early, flipping the sign to closed and locking the front door without a word. Leela sat at the piano. Adrian stood behind her, close enough that she could hear the slow rhythm of his breathing. She played the 4 bars. He hummed along quietly, adjusting the phrasing with his voice. She added a second line. He altered his words. They weren't trying to write a song, but somehow they were. It unfolded slowly, chord by chord, line by line. No deadlines, no expectations. Just 2 people finding each other in the space between notes. At one point, she stopped playing and glanced over her shoulder. "What are we doing?" He smiled. "I don't know, but it feels like the first thing in a long time that doesn't need to be explained." She nodded and went back to the keys. Over the next week, they kept adding to it, never forcing it, letting it grow in its own time. The melody started to take on meaning neither of them tried to name. It carried threads of grief, of stillness, of the small, stubborn hope that maybe second chances were possible. Leela started calling it the in-between song, space between fear and hope, between holding on and letting go. One night, as they played it under the cafe's dim lights, Adrian said softly, "You know this isn't just music." "I know," she replied. "Then why haven't we said anything?" "Because I'm still learning how to trust what I feel, and I don't want to ruin it by naming it too soon." He nodded. "Me too." They didn't speak of love, not yet, but the silence between them was anything but empty. It was full of everything they were ready to say. A few evenings later, a regular customer asked Leela if she'd play something before closing. She looked at Adrian. He gave a small nod. She sat at the piano and began to play their song. No lyrics, just the melody. The cafe grew quiet, the low hum of the espresso machine and clinking cups fading into stillness. When the last note died away, there was no applause, just a silence so deep it felt like the room itself was holding its breath. Later, as she was wiping down the counter, Adrian leaned toward her. "I think we found something." "What do you mean?" "Not just the song," he said. She didn't answer immediately. Then she said, "I think it was always there. We just didn't know how to listen." He touched her hand lightly in it to pull her closer, not to claim anything, but simply to connect. And in that moment, there was nothing to prove, nothing to protect. Only music, only them. Only the quiet understanding that what they were building was not made from declarations or grand gestures, but from every shared note, every glance, every moment they allowed themselves to be seen without fear.